Okay. Yeah, hello to everybody. Welcome to our second Treffpunkt Gemeinwesenarbeit. This is a series of online events, meant to discuss and to communicate and to network. And I'm very happy to be able to moderate this first international Treffpunkt Gemeinwesenarbeit and to have a guest from England. Alison, where are you located in England?
I'm in the Lake District in the north.
Okay.
Just south of Scotland.
Okay. So everybody's invited to enter some words in the chat, and we will play our introductory jingle.
Sing along.
Okay.
That was nice.
Yeah, that's the starting point, and I would like to have Christian say hello to everybody because he's one of the organizers at bifeb, or he's the organizer, I have to say. Christian, just a second, I have to unmute your microphone. Yeah, now it's your turn.
Okay, it's my turn. Hello from Strobl at Lake Wolfgangsee, from the Federal Institute for Adult Education here in Austria, from Erwachsenenbildungsinstitut, bifeb. We have a series on the topics of community education, and starting to this year with the webinars, with the big help from David. And not to forget that Alison Gilchrist was in Vienna, and here she joined us at the Institute last year. Finally, for me, this topic on adult education and community education is one of those topics to be developed in the next few months and years here at the Institute for Continuing Education for Adult Educators. So thank you, Alison, joining us here, and we'll see you in September this year in a workshop here at the Institute. David, if you go on. Thank you.
Yeah, Alison, now the floor is yours. Some words about you, and we will start with a presentation. Everybody is invited to, I think, always interrupt her presentation with questions. It should really be an interactive session. Yeah, Alison, the floor is yours, please.
Yes, I haven't got the slides in front of me. I mean,
yes.
Have you? Here they're coming.
I know.
All right, okay. My cue cards. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I've also this is my first experience of being a presenter on an online session, so it's something that's new for me as well. So let's see how it goes. My background is as a community development worker, but I've also been involved in doing some action research and some joint research with universities who are working with communities around various projects. So I have a varied background, which I will be sharing with you now. So the first slide, the aims of the session are to share some basic principles of how to do action research. So it's going to be quite practical. And then see how using an action research model can be a basis for developing communities, for exploring how community development values can contribute to that. Think about some of the key processes that are important for community-led action research. Discuss with you, hopefully as well, from your experience, some examples of how communities have been using action research in practice. And then towards the end of the session, maybe think about some of the problems and the difficulties that can be encountered as you undertake this kind of research, because it's not It's not always straightforward, and as researchers or as community members, or indeed as community facilitators or adult education people, you're not in control of the process. And that's what makes it particularly interesting, I think. So the core purpose of action research, there are several main fundamental aims. Obviously, the first one is to actually find ways of investigating a particular problem or achieve a particular goal, and how you might find solutions to that. So thinking about what the community identifies the main priorities or the main issues, and then working with community members to develop a solution, so identify something that will work in practice. And then to do that, you'll be gathering evidence from a range of sources, primarily community members themselves about their experience and their ideas, and then using this evidence to decide on a strategy that can be implemented in a real situation. So in that local neighbourhood or village or region, whatever you're looking at. And then you might also want to actually look at some of the actions that have been decided and test them, actually implement and see which ones are better or maybe how they could be improved. And so at the end of the day, the main purpose really is that action research is about achieving some kind of change for communities. And it's a change that communities themselves say they want to pursue. And how this links to community development is that it's very closely based and focused on how communities themselves define their needs, and also how they articulate what it is they want to achieve, their aspirations. So it's not about people from outside coming in and saying, these are your problems, this is what needs to be done, and then getting on with it. It's very much about communities being in control of the process and developing their own approach. Community development is also very closely based on a collective or cooperative approach. So this means that it's about encouraging people to work together, both within communities, but also to bring in community partners. So that might be civil society organisations that are working in the area. It might be agencies from government or local councils. It could even be local businesses. So it's looking around to see who can contribute and bringing them together in some kind of partnership or arrangements where people can work together, but always bearing in mind that communities are in the lead and should have the main say in how things are developed. Community development is also very much about shared decision making. So it's not about one person being in charge, and making sure that people understand that they have a responsibility for what happens and that they share that responsibility with one another. An important aspect of community development is that it builds capacity. After the piece of work is finished, there should be increased skills, better knowledge of the situation, and generally the people who have been participating should be more confident about what they can do and what their roles could be. So it's about increasing the capacity of communities to do whatever they want to do, in the sense of maybe doing more research, delivering service, running a building, whatever that might be that we've been working on. Community development also is fundamentally about practical applications. It's about changing things in the real world. So it should be very definitely about making differences that communities can see immediately, not necessarily immediately, but they can see that there is impact on the ground, and that they're relatively they're practical things that people wanted and can make use of, and which will, as I say, make a difference to their lives. And then finally, in terms of principles of community development, there's an overarching value, an overarching principle, which is that any activity or any work that is we're doing with communities should promote equality and inclusion. So in everything that is being carried out, whether it's organising meetings or recruiting volunteers, it's the thinking about who might be excluded here, where might discrimination be happening, where are the prejudices, and making sure that those are addressed so that people can take part in a way that's inclusive and more or less on the basis of some kind of equality. And I know that appears here as one bullet point, and I know it's much more complicated than I've just described. So maybe that could be something, an issue we come back to. So moving on. So community-led action research, which is the focus of today's webinar, has been defined as research on, by and for the community. And there are a number of models that you can look at in the literature and in practice. The first I've indicated is known as participatory appraisal. And that's something that's been particularly developed in developing countries in the south of the world. So India and Africa and some of the Far Asian countries, where communities are brought together to have an overview and share their knowledge and their experience about what's going on in their areas, in their villages or cluster of villages, and do an assessment basically of what the issues are and what's available and what they want to achieve. Often that's done using maps and drawings to take into account sometimes literacy issues. There's also community audits, which is quite similar but has been developed more in a European context, and that's about where community members systematically find out what's available in their community in terms of talents, buildings, services, find out who's living in that community, because that's not always immediately known. And it could also be about working with communities to identify what local people or what people living and working there see as the main problems facing that community. So it's creating a picture really of what's going on. And then there's asset mapping and appreciative inquiry, which I've linked together because they both emphasize very much the positive aspects of communities. And they're saying what are the strengths of these communities and what's already going on, what's good about life here, what do people want to build on and protect. And it's sometimes seen as a contrast to the other approaches, which may be more about looking at how communities see their needs and their difficulties. Asset mapping might be using some kind of checklist, or it might be interviewing people about what they like about their community. And then appreciative inquiry is quite similar. Sometimes it uses encourages people to tell stories about what they've appreciated in their community, and then using these stories to identify common themes across a few people living there, or quite a lot of people. And then the fourth model that I put up is something called systematic inquiry, and that's where all the different organisations, key organisations that are working in or with a community are involved in addressing a number of questions. And so it's using a whole systems approach. It recognises that communities are operating within larger social systems or organisational systems, and recognising that that can be quite complex sometimes, but trying to get the different perspectives and the different levers, if you like, in the picture, so that where people have identified things that need changing, there's already a set of relationships and understanding that can be used to make those changes. And then I've also included two other models at the bottom here, which are at the moment being called co-design and co-production in England, certainly, with this jargon popular at the moment. And that's where communities are involved in working with partners who are often universities, as I've indicated in the next bullet point, to design, to look at what's going on in their communities, to design some research, to produce the research together, in order to identify solutions and outcomes that could be delivered jointly. So it's very much about the cooperative, collective approach. And there are a lot of examples of that at the moment, because one of the has developed a big program called Connected Communities to really encourage universities to work with local communities. And I've had quite a lot of experience of being involved in some of those projects, which are, as I indicated before, are not straightforward. They run into all kinds of difficulties, which in a sense we'll be looking at later on. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question at this point before I go on to methods?
Yeah, any questions for Alison at this point? Okay, so you can proceed.
Okay, so I've listed here some examples of methods that are being used in practice at the moment, and the sort of standard methods right at the top is where people use surveys and questionnaires, which could be delivered through street surveys, either going door to door or choosing a sample of households in an area, and this could be in the form of tick boxes or questionnaires. But we've also got examples of surveys that can be done online, like SurveyMonkey, which some people may be familiar with, which is where the surveys are sent to people as an online tool, and they usually take about 15 minutes for people to complete. But there are also questionnaires which can allow a sort of more in-depth discussion to develop. They don't just have to be tick box or simple to use. Also seen video boxes used very effective, where a little sort of little structure, temporary structure with a video camera has been set up, for example, in schools or in shops or community centres or libraries, and people can go in and simply talk to the camera, and sometimes there are questions posed for them to respond to, or they can just be asked to talk about something that's important to them in their community. So that's again a very flexible way of gathering ideas and information about how people see their community. A slightly more complicated approach, but it's fairly easy to carry out, is a method called semi-structured interviews, which those of you who are already doing research will probably be familiar with. And that's where the researchers construct a set of questions around particular topics. So there's some structure there, but then there's also room to be flexible and to go and explore particular themes or issues that the person being interviewed thinks are important. So that flexibility is built in, and that's why they're called semi-structured interviews. The next thing that people are using are focus groups, which are require more organising in a sense, and they should be carefully facilitated, I think. And that's where 5 or 6, 7 people come together around a particular theme or question and share their ideas. And the focus groups allow 2 things to happen that are useful. One is that you can get a range of opinions and experiences together in one room, and then look at how those differences get discussed. And that's an important aspect, I think, of it's more of a discussion, clearly, that's what the group does, rather than collecting the views from specific individuals. So it can be used at maybe as a second stage in the research, perhaps using the surveys or the interviews to collect evidence from the whole range of people, and then bringing those together through specific themes, bringing those themes together rather to be discussed by hand-picked groups, so selected individuals who perhaps have some kind of responsibility within the community to take things forward. And then I identified a series, a set of more creative ways of thinking about gathering evidence and doing some research. One is through called storytelling and dialogue, whereby somebody in the group might tell a story about an experience they've had, and then other people comment on it and maybe relate it to something they've experienced themselves, or they could ask questions to get the storyteller to elaborate a bit more on that experience and why the story means something to them. So that again, that's in a way like a focus group, but it's more focused on one person's experience. And when I say story, I mean a fictional story. I mean something that's definitely happened. Could be recently, or it could be in the distant past. And similar to that is asking people to go out and take photos or film with little video cameras of things that matter to them in their communities. And you could set people with a particular task or a focus. For example, it's been used often with young people who seem to like this approach, to say, go out and film or take photos of the things that really annoy you in the community or that you really like. And then people bring those photos or those little films back together again, and then generate a discussion using those. So people are asked to talk about their photos, or they're put up in some kind of exhibition, and you know, the rest of the community could be invited to comment on those, or using little post-it notes or comment boards. There's lots of ways, but it's a way of people who are perhaps less comfortable using words can contribute. And use of digital cameras and little video cameras make that all a lot easier and cheaper than it used to be in the old days. Maps are very useful ways of getting people to think about their area. I mean, physically having a large-scale map which people can stand around and look over and point out where their house is, for example, or their route to school, or the significant buildings, which could be the local church, the park, it could be a particular green space that is being spoiled or threatened. There's a way of, again, encouraging people to say what's important to them, what they want to see changed and or protected, indeed, and to generally encourage discussion around the map. And people can, you can sometimes use photos and maps together so that people can stick on the map a photo that's particularly important to them. So there's ways of sort of using all of these models in combination, which can be really fun as well. And planning for real, which some of you may have heard of, is a technique that's been around for about 20-30 years in the UK. It's used as a planning tool and basically consists of either somebody bringing or the community themselves constructing a large-scale model of the area that's under discussion. And again, it's a bit similar to the mapping, where people stand around the table and they can put on photos or post-it notes or comments to say what it is that they want to change or keep, or just to ask a question. So there are all these methods of finding out about an area, getting communities to share their ideas, highlight particular issues or dreams or visions that they want to see achieved. But there's also a final aspect of action research, which is researching an action. So actually doing something which may be based on research that's previously been done, maybe the previous year, and then testing a way of addressing that or making that change. So, and again, we call that piloting a new way of working. So it would be maybe having a before baseline, so looking at gathering evidence about the situation now, doing the action, running the project or making the change in the way the traffic system works, for example, and then measuring afterwards how things are different. So hopefully there would be improvement. So that's an actual test of something that's happening in reality. And on this list, I've just given you some examples, some of them from my own experience, some of them from useful guidance that I've seen. So many years ago, I'll just very briefly run through these, and we can come for more detail if anyone's interested. I was doing some work in a city neighbourhood, an urban neighbourhood, to develop a fairer race equality strategy. And we realised we didn't actually know what the population was of people from different ethnic minorities living in the neighbourhood. So somebody went out and gathered those statistics and I think did a little survey just so that we knew, for example, how many people from Pakistan, how many from Bangladesh, how many from Africa, how many from all sorts of places, and what their language needs were as well. We also did some research, which was to go out and ask people, this was somebody else, in fact, if I read it properly, in Scotland, where some older, they did some research to find out what older carers, so people who are caring for partners or children or parents, see what their needs were. So people who were, I think the definition was over 55, so actually go and ask those carers what kind of support needs they had. And they also included in that a case study, so they found one individual and did a more detailed study of his day-to-day life, really, and then used that to publicise and get publicised the situation and get some changes, in fact, in the support services. I'm working with a lot of local programme, which is a big funding programme in England. And every area that has been awarded funding has to produce what's known as a community profile. And they're using whole range surveys, video boxes, public meetings, films to gather ideas from the neighbourhood and then present them all together as a picture of what's going on in that neighbourhood and what they want to prioritise as changing, using the money to change things. I've also been involved. One of these community university partnerships has used craft activities, so they've used craft materials and painting, all sorts, to get people to share their perceptions of what it means to have a good life, to be healthy. And they've produced what they call pictures of health, to get people discussing things, and they've also used drama and storytelling to do that. There's another group again up in Scotland which has worked with schools mainly to map the kind of biodiversity in a local green space, and then as a result of that an environmental management scheme has been developed and the schools are involved in that. So that's been partly about educating children to see what wildlife exists in their area and what's threatened, and then to get them to take more responsibility. Another project has been to look at the drug. This has been carried out by the mothers of younger people who use drugs and problematically, and they did a public questionnaire which was to look at how people use drugs, and to see how aware people were of local support services. And again, as a result of that research, there were changes both in the way support services are publicised in the area, and also there's a greater recognition drug use is a major problem, greater public recognition. Obviously the mothers themselves knew what was going on, but they felt that other people in the wider services and the wider community didn't really understand the situation. And then finally, in my list of examples, there's a whole movement in rural areas in this country, and techniques called village appraisals and parish profiles, and they are used again as planning tools to get a picture of what's going on, what local residents feel is needed in their villages or their parishes, which are slightly larger than villages, and getting either the community themselves to make those changes or to attract more resources. So I've noticed that time is getting on. So thinking about the benefits and impact of this approach, and how it links to community development, I think the main benefit is it's a way of involving people from all ages and all backgrounds in looking at their communities and contributing their ideas and their experiences to the process. And if it's done well, it's a really good way of developing local expertise and research capacity, so that people, the communities themselves, can feel confident to design their own research in the future, to present findings and to argue for changes. So it's generally a way of building capacity. Some of the issues that communities are facing are extremely complex. They may appear in communities in the shape of a lot of litter, or people using drugs, or high levels of poverty. But by doing some research, by doing a bigger investigation, it does increase people's understanding of how complicated some of these issues can be, and therefore how complicated the solutions might be to addressing them. Having research, research is obviously about gathering evidence, and if the community has been involved in identifying the problem and what they think needs to be done to support change, then this is a way of presenting a really strong case for altering things, for changes in services or changes in policy. Or it could also be a case, an argument for increasing funding, bringing in funding to the area, or maybe investing it as some kind of social loan that could be used to generate an income, some kind of enterprise that can address the problem. And finally, it can be used to create a business plan for the area, which again helps people to think through in more detail what can be done and present the argument to other people who might be involved, as I mentioned. So a number of issues and challenges, clearly. I think the first one is often involved in defining the research question, because people do bring different experiences and perspectives to the discussion, and choosing which question to focus on isn't necessarily straightforward. Sometimes also to have useful evidence, you need some kind of comparison. For example, a before and after study, what's changed after the action, or you might want to have some kind of controlled experiment. In science, as it were, that's how things are done generally, but in working with communities, that's much more unlikely, because it's very hard to say, well, we'll do this in this community, and over here is an identical community, but we won't do anything, because that situation just rarely occurs in reality. It's also sometimes quite hard to establish a baseline in order to measure change, because people want to get going. They want to make the changes, and then suddenly realise that there's no way of evaluating whether the change has worked and achieved what it was they wanted. And there are also challenges around deciding whether to get quantitative evidence or qualitative evidence. So to some extent, not using numbers can be seen as more scientific or more robust, but that can be hard in terms of sampling, because you don't have enough of a sample, the size isn't right, or it's not a sufficient range of people involved. But it is possible to, as part of this action research, to get some baseline statistics from the census or the local council. It's often out there, but people don't feel very confident to go and find it. There's a challenge often in identifying actually what the evidence you've collected means in practice. What are the implications? Because people don't always agree on their interpretation of the findings. So the process of analysis can be really crucial. People read different things into the same evidence. So a lot of discussion can cause divisions at that stage. And then thinking about how you can apply your findings is also not straightforward. There's no clear follow through from having some findings and saying, and this is what it will mean in terms of change. And then finally on that slide, agreeing what should be done, because again, there are limitations in terms of resources, who can, what people think is the right action to take forward, and generally who's going to do what. So there's lots of different stages to doing action research, which all have their potential pitfalls. To speed up a bit, ideally in community-led action research, the people undertaking the research on the ground should be members of that community, rather than bringing in students or volunteers from outside or university academics. Because that's about, as I said earlier, building the capacity, the skills, the confidence of community members to do it again in the future. But in order to do that, they will probably need support and training, and possibly also some mentoring along the way. So that's really important to build into the projects that you're designing. And then there are also issues about confidentiality, because if you're asking people to share their ideas or their personal stories, you need to think about how people can give their evidence anonymously, or understand, be confident that what they've said won't be spread all around the community. So that's a discussion that needs to be had with whoever's doing the research. What the next bullet point around power dynamics is particularly crucial, because there are often differences, both in terms of what people think is right, but also the power and status that people have who are doing the research. So community members may not feel they have much power, even though it's supposed to be community-led. Whereas partners may have much more experience and status, and they often may hold the funding. And this is an issue that we've seen within the community university partnerships, that is still ongoing discussion. Accountability is very important in terms of any results are fed back to the community themselves. So any reports or presentations are made available so people understand what happened, what the results were, and are involved in any implications. Sometimes people think by doing a piece of research you can wave a magic wand and things will miraculously change. So there's need to manage expectations about what might be achieved, and seeing research as one part of the jigsaw. And there's issues around whether the research itself has credibility, how it's disseminated, and then how it's used to persuade others to act, and persuade the community to mobilise around a particular position. So to summarise, community-led action research needs to be both collaborative and inclusive. So it needs to involve anybody who's interested and to encourage people to work positively together. It should focus on achieving some kind of real change that's meaningful for the people involved, and develop a proposal that's based on sound evidence, and that will strengthen the case. It will make it more persuasive. It will strengthen the community leadership aspect of the research. It will give the community themselves a sense of ownership, so it's something that they have developed, the solution based on the sound evidence being collected and analysed. And using all those approaches, it will build the capacity of people in the community. So that's the link with community development, really. And if all that goes according to plan, then the outcomes, the changes will be successful, which is what clearly everybody is looking for. So that's the end of my presentation. I've got some questions for discussion, which I hope will contribute. So I'll stop there and hand over to David again.
Yeah, so thank you very much for this presentation, Alison. And I'm now looking forward for your remarks or questions. Please go ahead. Oh yeah, do you have examples of good practice actually?
Yes, I think one that I've been working with very recently, some group of parents, mothers mainly, have been wanting to develop a soft play facility. So that's about having equipment that is about things that are soft, basically, not hard play like swings and slides. And they worked with another organisation which have been designers, architects, planners, and also a university to develop a survey that they've taken out to other parents in the local community. And as a result of that survey, they put forward a case together to persuade the local council to think about developing some kind of facility for the area. And that's been very useful for the group because it strengthened the group in terms of their confidence and knowing what it is they want to achieve. But they've also used the survey as a way of reaching out into the wider community and opening up their group to many more people who are interested. They've also complemented that survey with running kind of taster sessions in soft play. So they've hired equipment and run these big play events. And that's been another way of finding out what it is that people want and demonstrating, in fact, that there's a real demand, there's a real desire to have soft play applications and facilities. That would be my good example.
Okay, thank you. Christian has got a question.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. My question is on literacy programs. What's in Austria called Basisbildung, or in German Grundbildung, Alphabetisierung. What's the importance of literacy programs in the field of community education and action research? Do you have any practice or ideas on this issue? Because in Austria, this is a very important topic now, access to basic education.
I don't have any examples immediately to mind of where action research has been used to develop literacy programs as such. But my instinct is to think that anybody who has the courage to come forward and to contribute to some action research and to be one of the researchers, if they get sufficient support, they will be helped to develop, for example, through the wording of the research question, or maybe looking at help with analysing some of the results if they're quantitative. Then this could be a way of thinking about basic numeracy. What proportion of the community want this solution? It's a way of sort of thinking about proportions and fractions and numbers, what the meaning of numbers is. So I can see lots of potential, and I apologise for not having any specific examples. As you know, adult education is particularly my field. It's more informal education through community development. I could find out for you though if you wanted. Okay.
Okay, Elisabeth is asking about who feels responsible to start action research. Is it a top-down, top-down approach? Or?
I think it often is a top-down approach, if I'm perfectly honest. Yes, I think it's often a funder may come in and say, we want to work with this community, you in the community, to look at a particular project and evaluate, to work with you to design the project on the ground, or to evaluate something that's happening already. And then there's another example is that the Connected Communities programme, which is run by a research council, that is being funding available to universities. So the universities have applied for the funding and then gone out to find communities to work with. And although they haven't come in saying, this is the research we want to do, they have come in to say, we've got some money, how can we work with you to do some research? So it's often the starting point has been the people who have to do the research. Some of the examples I gave from Scotland were similarly a government programme was created to work with communities to do some action research, and that funding programme was allocated to a national organisation who then advertised this funding was available, and communities came forward to apply for it and then to use the money to do their own action research. But I think it's quite rare for communities themselves to say, we need to investigate this problem more and use that as their starting point. As ever, money is often the catalyst to kickstart something.
I see. Okay, any further?
It's a good question though, Elizabeth.
Yeah,
good question.
It's really good, yeah. Otherwise, I would have some questions.
Okay.
As you can see, I'm facilitating with online sessions, so it's for me it's very important to use online tools for participatory processes as well. So action research relies on participation and transparency, but you haven't told, or maybe I haven't heard it, about the use of online tools to accompany action research. What do you think about that, or aren't online tools not often used? I don't know.
I mean, the one that I have seen used well is SurveyMonkey.
Yeah.
I've been that's used to do large-scale surveys. The problem with that is that you're never quite sure who's going to respond. So you might send it out to thousands of people, and a self-selecting sample will find the time or the interest to complete it. So there are issues around sampling around that, but they're just part of the puzzle. But the other interesting issue, which has come across is that people have tried to use online tools like Facebook or Dropbox or
just maybe even to document the process and to make the process transparent. I think this would be interesting.
Well, that's what a couple of organisations I've been working with have set up Facebook groups to do this.
Yes.
But found that communities haven't generally gone and used them. So, for example, the one I was just describing about the parents in play, which is part of a bigger project, we did set up a Facebook site to support that, and they themselves do have a Facebook site which is very well used, but using it for the actual process of research didn't happen at all. So I was doing everything by sending emails to people. And similarly, we tried to use Dropbox as a way of collecting all the information together. And there were some people who couldn't access Dropbox, so we still use it, but it wasn't that much. In fact, I think it was hardly used at all by community members. So there's room for improvement, David.
Okay. Maybe another issue would be open access or Creative Commons. You know, to give the results of the research to the community. Is there a consciousness concerning, are action researchers aware of commons in research?
I'm certainly aware of it, and I've seen it used. Is there a problem? No. But I don't know that communities would be particularly aware of it. But certainly in terms of sharing the reports or sharing the materials, that would be very helpful, because then people don't always have to reinvent the wheel. They can actually learn from each other, which would be really useful. But if you know more, which you clearly do, have you got some examples?
One example would be the new Horizon 2020 program of the European Union really demands to have everything published as an open access publication.
Yes.
And the next step would be to have a really transparent process of research too. So that means that everything has to be open, the data and so forth.
Yes, I agree in principle, and certainly the big local programme, which is the funding programme that has been doing the community profiles, operate on that basis. And they have a big open website which you can register for and go and look and see what other areas have been doing in terms of research. But I also think there are issues around the confidentiality one. For example, the sort of ongoing interviews that I've been doing with people working on this action research. I don't know how best to describe it, but anyway, I had to persuade people that they were answering their questions to me in confidence, and then I had to anonymise all their responses.
It's kind of privacy issues.
Yes. So just making everything transparent isn't.
Yeah, it's not always possible.
I think then people are always kind of watching what they say, whereas sometimes you want people to speak very candidly, for example, about power dynamics or their experience.
You're right. You need a protected environment as well.
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any further comments on this or on other aspects of action research? Christian, I will microphone rights again. Now you can speak up.
Okay, yes. I remember that the first two events on Gemeinwesenarbeit, community education here in the late 70s, had an instrument which was called aktivierende Befragung, action research. And this was done with paper and pencil, going out as a field study. And later on, in the middle of the 80s, this instrument wasn't so interested for the researchers at Gemeinwesenarbeit, at social education, at community education. So nowadays we have a lot of digital instruments to do this research. And in literacy programs, therefore my question, my first question after your presentation to this topic of literacy programs was that there is an issue on how do we reach persons with little interest to participate in education, and is there action research, for example, a possibility to involve these groups of persons who are not interested in participating in lifelong learning, to refer to this international programs. But that's a problem I too have, because this too is that it could be a process top down and not bottom up. If people, researchers, are intruding these areas of groups who are not interested in participate.
I think that sorry.
Okay, that's it. That's it.
I think the key is finding a focus that really engages with people, that they really are interested in or passionate about, that matters to them. And then people often learn because they want to develop that, they want to find out more, and that they can see why learning about literacy or numeracy will help them directly. So a very practical application. Is that it? Have you finished? The other thing I just wanted to say before we close is just to say on the final slides, final two slides, I've just put some additional resources.
That's fine, yeah.
So some websites that people might want to have a look at, and also some further reading that people could look at. And I'd particularly recommend the first one, produced by the Scottish Centre for Community Development. It's really, really excellent. And it's got lots of examples and lots of really practical guidance, questions to think about, checklists. Just to finish with signposting people to those two.
Okay, thank you very much, Alison. Thank you everybody for participating. I think we had an interesting overview about action research. And yeah, see you at Lake Wolfgang in September for the on-site workshop. And you can meet the frog in person there.
And I'll be swimming. I'll be in the water.
Yeah, swim. Yeah, take the frog to the lake, and yeah, everything. The recording and the presentation will be published at Gemeinwesenarbeit.at at the community website, and please join as well the community there and the Facebook group. And yeah. Thank you. Have a nice day. And goodbye.
Cheers. Bye.